Okay, welcome to tomorrow's Church Today, Bivocational Ministry and a Mainline Denomination. We have with us tonight Reverend Dr. Marvin Moss, Director of Congregational Development and Revitalization in the New York Annual Conference, and the Reverend Dr. Karen Monk, who is District Superintendent of the Catskill Hudson District of the New York Annual Conference. My name is Daryl Stevens. I'm Director of United Methodist Studies and the Pennsylvania Academy of Ministry at Lancaster Theological Seminary. I'm also Project Director for a grant project this year of educating for a thriving bivocational ministry. So this event is part of our bivocational ministry initiative here. And tomorrow's Church Today, we are at a pivotal point in so-called mainline denominations. While some may see decline, this is also an exciting time to serve as a pastoral leader. There is a new form of church emerging in and around our present congregations. And so, without further ado, we're going to hear from Marvin and Karen about bivocational ministry, and in particular about the church in their context in the New York Annual Conference. And as promised, they've got some pastoral openings. And I know some of you may be interested in hearing about those opportunities. And even if it's not the right location for you, they may have some insight into how you might discern an appropriate pastorate, especially bivocational ministry, which is, as we know, it is unique to each person. Marvin and Karen, what changes have you observed in congregations and pastoral ministry during your lifetime or your careers in ministry? And as you talk about this being a pivotal point, what's different now than it used to be?
Go ahead, Marvin.
I'll defer to Karen.
Okay, all right. You know, in my lifetime. So, well, I became a United Methodist at 16. I grew up in the South, Bible Belt. One church, one pastor, seminary trained leader for worship, pastoral care, administration. Usually there's a church secretary and a paid musician. Every church had a building. Its purpose was the program and ministry of the church itself. Maybe some recovery groups. And that's kind of the way I grew up in the district that I serve in. We have a lot of multiple point charges. We have pastoral teams. We're pretty entrepreneurial in places. And I see the emergence of also laypersons in leadership in partnership with ordained and seminary trained people, working as partners, matching spiritual gifts and graces. We are reimagining buildings. You know, what's their actual purpose? Who are their appropriate partners? There's no point in having a performance space for 500 people open once a week. How do we properly steward these things that were the right thing to build in the late 19th century and the early 20th? But now, what's the right home for a faith community? And with these buildings, how do they become assets for ministry? And that requires some out-of-the-box thinking on the part of both the pastoral leaders and the laity, and a reorientation of our thinking about church. You know, the other thing that with COVID, last year when I was doing charge conferences in 2019, in the fall of 2019, I have about 99 churches in the district. And I would say, you know, we are a great 20th century church. You know, and they would nod, and then there'd be a minute while they realized, oh, we're 20 years into the 21st century. And then we'd talk about what are the treasures we keep, and what is it we need to let go of that got kind of rolled into the mix that isn't essential to being the church. And here's what COVID did for us. Drop kicked us into the 21st century to having to use digital tools like Zoom, but Zoom for house church is a different thing. I mean, a Zoom worship is a house church. Utilizing Facebook, utilizing YouTube for live premiere launches, enhancing family worship. A couple of pastors do a great job of sending out a package email that says, you know, our Sunday service is going to premiere on YouTube at X time. Gather your family, get your coffee, make yourselves comfortable. Here's a question to think about as you sit down together. So some of our pastors have done an amazing job of embracing the opportunity in this and really enhancing families' time together in worship and conversations that go outside of worship. You know, COVID has been a challenge and a heartbreak and a heartbreaking time. And to do the work of caring for people and making sure people's distancing does not become isolation has required a lot of intentionality on the part of pastoral leaders and their congregations. But also we have recovered or discovered and uncovered what are some of the essences of being followers of Jesus and communities of faith when things are not easy. Man, you read the texts from the exile very differently now than I did a year ago. Or I read the letters of Paul differently than I did a year ago. I lean into the Psalms in a way I did not lean as much a year ago. So some of those are things that have really been catapulted and an extra catalyst of COVID, that there's an opportunity in it. And certainly not, I don't think God sent COVID to get the church to wake up, but we have awakened in some places, and I think it's helping move us forward in some new ways.
Thank you, Karen.
Yes.
So as Marvin's responding and Karen as well, I invite everyone to use the chat bar if you want to put in comments or questions. We can have a parallel dialogue going on as things come to you that you want to share. Marvin, how's the church changed?
Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Great to see you. And Daryl, thank you for the opportunity. A whole lot has changed. I just turned 16, but I've been at this for quite some time. I started in when did I start? 1999. And I come from Atlanta. So the Bible Belt, North Georgia Conference, and a whole lot has changed. There's no longer what is called brand loyalty. People are not going to go to the church just because it's United Methodist. In many cases, they run from it. People are not as disciplined, I will say, in terms of the different options and opportunities on Sunday. One thing that has changed, children are now allowed to make decisions. When I was growing up, I had a drug problem. My mother drugged me to church every Sunday. So I had no choice. I had to go. And worship styles have changed. Before, I'll say back in the day, Sunday and Bible study, that did it. Because people were working, I mean, they had a regimented life then. And so the basics, if you will, the traditional has changed quite a bit. Now we see different messaging. We see different packaging, if you will. Church is approached more from for lack of a better term, a corporate perspective, in that studies are done, analysis, there's an analysis of your congregants, demographics, all of the data is collected. As a matter of fact, Karen and I will be in a meeting later this week dealing with data. Well, I'll be dealing with data. And as we look at the churches that are available, marketing and sales, product, e-commerce, and as Karen mentioned, technology. When I was in Georgia, we streamed. Streaming was a part of the service anyway. And then I came to New York, to Salem, and it was foreign. And of course, there was no budget. Well, there's never a budget for anything, but we were blessed to be able to get the equipment so that we can stream. And I was mentioning to you before, prior to COVID, we had about 350 in worship. And now we're getting about 500 hits every Sunday, because we are not only reaching individuals in the States, but overseas, because Salem is located in Harlem and it was on the tourist route. And so we would get quite a few individuals from France, Italy, and Spain. And in terms of the changes as it relates to church, the mind starts moving. How do you engage your international guests? How do you reshape the culture and stop the congregants from calling them foreigners? And that was one of the things that I learned when I first came to Salem. I was told we have a lot of foreigners. And I said, so we're going to call them international guests. I said, if anyone is foreign, we are. They speak 3 and 4 languages, and we're trying to master 1. And so I share that so that we can change the perspective. But basically the change, certain churches have kept up with the time, and that's why certain churches are growing and certain churches are still thriving. And the churches that have not embraced the change for fear of losing their identity, and I'll even push the envelope and say their control, they're the ones who are really struggling right now. So data, technology, mindset, culture, delivery, and packaging, those are the major changes that I've seen.
Thank you, Marvin. The next question, I'm going to put us right into bivocational ministry here. So what does bivocational ministry have to do with the new forms of church emerging in and around existing congregations? That is, we're at a pivot point here in the life of the church. How does bivocational ministry fit into that? What's the positive news here for bivocational ministry?
So, okay, Karen, my turn. All right, so I'm just going to be very, 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 very transparent. It is all about economics. It is finance. Churches cannot sustain a full-time pastor as has been the case. Well, excuse me, quite a few churches cannot sustain a full-time pastor as has been the case. And churches are struggling, a lot of rural area churches, and then churches in the city. And so bivocational, approaching it with the bivocational pastor will allow and afford the church the opportunity to continue to grow spiritually, impact the community, and fulfill its mission and vision without stress and strain on both the pastor and the church. Now, the balancing act piece, if you will, would be dividing your time so that enough attention, time, and intentionality is given to the forward movement of the church, as well as pastoring, which includes and is not limited to the visitations, developing relationships, breaking up fights, getting people to play well together in the sandbox, keeping individuals motivated, going after that one lost sheep. All of that, plays into it. But the major piece would be the economics of it all, or the financial advantage.
And I'm going to take it a little bit different direction in that in my first appointment, I was about 4 years in, and I wanted to pursue another degree. But I loved my church, and I knew I was going to make this transition, and finances were tight. And so we kind of retooled the church. We created what we called a pastoral care team. We said, well, we need people to help care for people. Who would you call if your family was having a tough time, if you were going through a crisis? Who do you call? And that's how we selected the people who had the gifts for that. We thought about who needs to be in ministry rather than, what I said at the beginning about one church, one pastor. Often that's been our person who's hired to do all the ministry for us while we watch. Or maybe we'll go to Bible study. But you'll do the hospital visiting, and you'll do the care, and you'll do the preaching. But when I went back to school and we restructured that appointment, suddenly I was equipping a group of people to do pastoral care. There's certain conversations that I, as the pastor, would be having, but here was a team, and we did some basic training in listening and in confidentiality and in checking on one another. We had another group of people who did some food stuff, you know, who does hospitality and who makes sure the food ministries are running. And suddenly, over time, the driver had been, I'm going to go back to school. We can't afford me full-time anyway, but look at what we can do. Now, that was a full disclosure, that was 30 years ago or so, around 30 years ago. They still have that pastoral care team is still functioning, doing pastoral work at the time of crisis or death or change. They meet together in praying, and they meet together to care for other folks. So they help carry that work. More of them participate in worship. They can bring a message. They can lead. I think that, and as a superintendent, I don't know what everybody else's background is. In the United Methodist Church, we are appointed, so you're sent somewhere. As a superintendent, I oversee the 60-something pastors, 99 churches. Places where we have less than full-time compensation, we're learning to think differently about church. That we said it, but we weren't sure we meant it. We are all in ministry. But I need pastors who are looking to understand their vocation and calling, understand what they must do. Sacrament, baptism, there's certain teaching elements that they must do and carry. But what can they also equip everyone else to do so that everyone's in ministry? And it's really living into the reality of that, rather than you're the hired person who brings the message, visits the hospital, and takes care of everything. That was never a good way to be a community of faith anyway. So while there are significant economic drivers, there's also this drive to reposition what does it mean to be a pastor. For Methodists, we had circuit riders. This district had circuit riders in 1788 who were covering vast territory long before we built buildings. And they were covering 4 or 5 communities. So what did the folks do when the circuit rider wasn't in town? We're recovering some of that and finding vitality in it.
That's inspiring. Thank you.
Daryl, I want to add, one of the things that Karen said, I mean, people are hungry too. What I'm learning and what I am seeing, there are quite a few laity who are ready for that type of leadership that Karen just described. Teach me, empower me, and then deploy me. And so I am finding that there are more people who are ready to engage in ministry, just as Karen just shared.
That's great. This might be a good opportunity for us to hear from everyone present. So Karen and Marvin, so you get a sense of who we're talking with. We've got some United Methodists here, but we've got some folks who are in other traditions. And let's hear from our students now. Just introduce yourself briefly and your name and denominational context. And if you have a pressing question, you can go ahead and ask it or put it in the chat here too. Angela, would you like to go first? And then you can call on someone else to go after.
Sure. My name is Angela Fale. I'm a student in Lancaster, and I come from the Pentecostal background. And I was eager to explore what this bivocational ministry means. And I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Well, thank you, Angela. And you may either ask a question now, or you can call on someone else to introduce themselves.
Okay, Bob.
Well, good evening. My name is Bob Garvey, and I am a licensed local pastor here in Lancaster, just south of Lancaster. I'm currently 3/4 time, and I'm getting ready to graduate with Master's of Divinity in May, and planning on pursuing full ordination. And I don't know if you know this, Dr. Stevens. I recently changed what I call my day job I am at a temp job at the Caterpillar tractor plant in York, PA, starting my day at 4 a.m. picking tractor parts, and in between picking tractor parts, I'm getting my seminary homework reading done and underlining parts. And so my bivocational adventure has taken an interesting turn. So, but we're making it work, and paychecks are your friend. So, right. No questions right now, but I will pass the baton to Martha.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure to be a classmate of yours these last couple of years. I'm Martha Harris, and I'm finishing up, hopefully, in May, graduating with an MDiv and a certificate in Anglican Studies. I'm a postulant for the priesthood in the Episcopal Church. So when I began my ministerial process many, many years ago, I envisioned a bivocational ministry. So I'm delighted that as the seminary that I'm about to graduate from has really embraced that as a very appropriate career track. I'm serving currently as a chaplain, rounding out my field education experience at our major trauma hospital, Lancaster General Health in Lancaster, where, as you may know, pastors cannot visit because of the COVID restrictions. And I'm finding that's a really, really important ministry and helping to shape my future call. I'm also an entrepreneur. I've been self-employed for the last 20 years with companies that focus on wellness, physical health and mental health and well-being. And what the chaplaincy is helping me understand is spiritual wellness. So I feel that God is calling me to a holistic approach, hopefully as an ordained Episcopal priest, if the bishop agrees and God willing. But how do we help people? And I see so many of these people in the hospital who don't have a faith. They don't know who God is, and yet they're at this life-changing event through trauma, accident, injury, or COVID. And I'm particularly interested in helping people before they get to that point to share a deep faith in God. So I did pose a question in the chat about I think this may be the rummage sale that Phyllis Tickle talked about, the rummage sale, that the pandemic is taking away brand loyalty, as Dr. Moss said, big time, and really opening us up to think differently about what church is, and not to define it as the tall steeple or the brick exterior, but really meeting people where they have the greatest needs. And I'm really interested in this august audience, or perhaps through future focus groups with the bivocational study, really understanding what that could look like. How do we do that? How can we help people find God by meeting them where they are? And I'm going to toss it to Cynthia.
Thanks, Martha. I'm Cynthia Layton, and I am a master's in ministry leadership student. So not an MDiv student, a master's in ministry leadership. And my last class is next Saturday, and I will be done. And I'm so excited. Yes. And I currently serve as the executive minister at my church, Cornerstone Baptist Church, and is in York. So Bob, I'll bring you lunch if you want. All right. Right here in York, PA. And I was formerly the minister of music. And then when I accepted my calling to preach, I began to work in other areas, began to do more teaching, more developing. My secular profession has been in human resources. And so I love leadership and I love developing people. And so my capstone project, actually, Dr. Monk was pretty much explaining it. So my capstone project for the seminary was how to develop leaders from lay leaders in small to medium African-American churches where the pastor is bivocational. And, a lot of churches, a lot of African-American churches hire pastors based on their preaching ability, not necessarily management skills. And so, we have a lot of good preachers in our churches, and they could be poor managers or poor caretakers or whatever the case may be. And so I developed a group through my project and did some training. And so now at my particular church, we have a pastoral care group. We have an administration group. We have a management conflict group to take care of those fights in the sandbox and all of that, unless it would need to go to the pastor, but kind of like a first point of contact. And so I am definitely interested in that type of work in the future. And I did leave my profession of 30 something years in human resources so that I could make time for seminary. And I'm now teaching at a high school, teach theology, Bible, and literature. And I'll pass it on to Jenifer.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jenifer Butler. I am a second year Master of Arts in Ministry and Leadership student. My previous professional career was working as a primary counselor in drug and alcohol and addictions specialist. Accepted the call, began going to Lancaster Theological Seminary after pastoring a cross-cultural appointment in Harford County, Maryland. Decided that was not for me. So kind of switched my roles from elder track to the deacon track. And my goal after graduating is to then pursue a PhD in psychology and eventually merge spirituality and, other special practices in my own private practice. So that is my goal, hopefully.
And who's with you tonight, Jenifer?
Kaylin.
She's also an excellent mother.
Yes, I'm a mom of 4, so I stay busy. Oh, I do need to call on someone. Let's see, Glenn. Am I reading that right?
Jen.
Jen?
Jenny. Hi.
Hello.
My name is Jenny. Hi, how are you? My name is Jenny. Call me Jen. I'm from Tennessee. And I'm a second year student at Lancaster. And my biggest achievement was for this year. I no longer say Lancaster. I say Lancaster. So that was my biggie for the year, being
That's
a Southern
graduation
girl.
requirement, So
Yes. And a couple of the things, my career, I served as a teacher and an educator at the university level in the Department of Education and chair of the department, School of Education. And I also serve in the music ministry. One of the things that has been a priority for me since the pandemic hit has been to maintain and help churches maintain their level of musical excellence so that the hymns and the anthems, as well as the contemporary music, is sustained. And at Lancaster, I'm focusing on a couple of things, and I haven't quite decided. I've got to know by February 1st, as a matter of fact, because our proposals will be due, working in faith and health, and also looking at issues related to systemic racism in educational school systems, helping them to overcome some of the barriers. What do the children, what do the families need? What is the church's role in helping to develop and maintain a balance so that our children can be fed academically as well as nutritionally and different areas like that. So I'm working really hard, praying. And I thought this would be a wonderful blessing. And so far it has been. And thank you so much. And it looks like I'm on freeze, but I hope I'm okay.
Thank you, Jenny. And Wat Esade is also with us. He is from Nigeria, member of the Evangelical Church Winning All. And he is in the Master Divinity Day program and is also a bivocational parent. So he is parenting as well as listening. Wat is also the my research assistant for this project on bivocational ministry. So we're glad you're here, Wat. So we've got a good variety of folks here interested in many different aspects of ministry, and the way bivocational ministry intersects with each of our lives is, as I said, is unique. I will say, in the white majority church that I grew up in, and the United Methodist Church has many different ethnicities and races, but it is a white majority denomination overall. When we talk about bivocational ministry in the white majority context, we often treat it as if it's something new. And the reality is that in African American traditions, immigrant churches, many Pentecostal and other traditions, bivocational ministry has been the way ministry has normally been done for generations. So whenever we talk about this as being something new, I'm always reminded it might be new for my context, but this is not a new idea, all the way back to Paul and his tent making. So we're not, I feel like my demographic is kind of rediscovering some of our, what the church can and should be when we talk about bivocational ministry. Marvin, I see you nodding, and you want to chime in there?
No, that is exactly what it is. And in this season of our lives, there are quite a few awakening experiences happening. For instance, our denomination, well, our conference, I'll say our conference, rethinking the entire makeup in terms of becoming an anti-racist annual conference. And our bishop has done a deep dive, Bishop Bickerton has done a deep dive as it relates to, again, data. And Karen can attest to this. We spent hours at the table in honest conversation, identifying areas of opportunity. And he has tasked us in this appointment making season to address the areas of inequity. And he is looking at not only in terms of appointments, but again, from the financial perspective, pay. And so to your point, bivocational ministry has been around. It is not new. Again, primarily in the African-American and other ethnic groups. And that was because of where we were as it relates to resources, and so I'll stop there. I could talk more. I'll stop there.
Karen?
Well, I was thinking about, Daryl, what you had written about a corrective to the metrics of vitality and how we talk about vitality. And one of the things we have discovered in this deep dive is we have very high-paid majority white congregations that are not super vital by metrics about transformation, about anti-racism, about healthy congregations, outward focused. So it's been very interesting to look at and think about how do we describe vitality? And if we're going to be an anti-racist annual conference, what will that look like? Jenifer spoke of being a cross-cultural, cross-racial appointment. We are being much more intentional. I put into the chat to Jenifer, 1/3 of our appointments are cross-racial or cross-cultural. And to be more intentional about our learnings, about how we equip our congregations and our persons who are serving, how we support persons who are serving cross-racially and cross-culturally intentionally. Microaggressions are aggressions happening to somebody else. Let's just be real. There is no microaggression. One of the things I'm tasked with is keeping an eye on how are our congregations functioning, and how are the pastors that in my care and my oversight who are serving cross-racially and cross-culturally, how are they doing? And how have we laid a good groundwork? And how do I really call out people, laity and leadership that I talk to, where they've got some growing to do, where we need to have a little come to Jesus chat, to help, because that is to be a healthy spiritual community, is to deal with these things.
Thank you. I think we're part of the pivot point that I see in the mainline denominations. And I'm speaking from particularly the white churches that I'm familiar with, because I that's the context I'm familiar with. So I can speak from my experience there, is that vitality has been measured in all sorts of different ways. And we are learning today, in this pivot point, we are learning new ways to recognize vitality that may have a lot more to do with the gifts and graces that individual members have and enabling people to be in ministry than it has to do with counting how many people are in the pews or counting how many dollars are in the bank account. And so I am grateful that we are beginning to recognize a more holistic understanding of what it means to be vital as a church and as congregations. Well, before we get much further, tell us about the opportunities in the New York Annual Conference. Some of these folks, they think, it's fine to talk about bivocational ministry, but show us the money, right? Show us the job. What's actually available for people who want to say, yes, I want to sign up, I want to do this. So tell us about some of the opportunities.
Reverend Moss, that's your portfolio, so I'll let you go first on that.
I was going to defer to the district superintendent. Okay, thank you.
We sound like those old chipmunks that used to defer to each other.
So part of my responsibility is having I guess a bird's eye view of the conference. At the present, 421 churches in New York, in the state of New York, and Southern Connecticut. And I'm looking at all of the churches, primarily those in areas where vitality is possible with the right leadership. And the right leadership includes what Dr. Stevens mentioned earlier in terms of, and Dr. Monk, in terms of individuals with gifts and graces for ministry. The tension is making sure that those gifts and graces are moving the church forward as it relates to vision and purpose. And as we all know, vision and purpose require investment, not only of time and gifts, but money. And so when you can get your congregation excited about the direction of the church, then that's what I'm looking for, what we're looking for. We have opportunities all over at the present. And Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but opportunities all over, not necessarily in the city, but outside of the city, also in Connecticut. And so, most of the time when they show New York, they show you Times Square and the Statue of Liberty. There's so much more beautiful country. I mean, it is beautiful here. And so we look at interested individuals, and then we look at opportunity, and we match gifts and graces. And one of the things that the cabinet is intentional about, I believe our bishop said this, we're not going to just stick a name in an empty slot. That's been done too long, and that's why most churches have died a slow, painful death. And so to answer the question, opportunities abound. And what we are looking for is the opportunity to discern the best possible match for gifts and graces so that we are engaging, empowering, and enlisting the service of individuals for kingdom building. And I'll close with this. I was in Atlanta. I had a 3,000 member church. We did 3 services on Sunday, midweek service, full staff, $3.2 million budget. And I came to New York. Now, I'll be honest, I was looking because I got the 7-year itch in year 5. I just felt like God was calling me to do more. And I was looking in LA, Northern Virginia, DC, and New York. New York was last because I said people visit New York. They don't live in New York, coming from the South. And the reason I share this with you, I came to a church that was going to be shut down. Oh yeah, and in Atlanta, the church I served, I had a parking spot. Yeah. So I get to New York, I walk into a church that is huge, maybe 20, 30 people. The church will seat 12 or 1,300. No parking. People, I mean, it was not good. I've been here 7 years, and I have never been more fulfilled in my ministry. This is my 3rd appointment, my 3rd church. I have never been more fulfilled in my ministry than serving this church, more specifically this conference where diversity and acceptance and love, the majority expresses. And our bishop is moving to make sure anyone who feels called to another place that they are okay to go with our love and our blessings, but he is not going to tolerate the foolishness that goes on. I hope I answered did I answer the question? Yeah, I'm a preacher, so give me the mic. You're in trouble.
Yeah, and I'm gonna tag on to that and say, so I came from East Texas, the buckle of the Bible Belt. I came to New York City to go to seminary, every intention of going back to Texas. But I loved the New York Annual Conference. People I met, not just in the city, but I took a drive out to the Catskills and I fell in love with the mountains. So, geographically, it's beautiful. We have beaches, we have the city, we have mountains, and there are tensions in that. We have the very rural and we have the very urban, and we have some of the wealthiest counties in the country, and we have some of the poorest counties around New York State. And we are all in the New York Annual Conference, and we are progressive and we are traditionalists and everything in between. And you pretty much name the way in which we measure diversities, and we nail it. I was excited to be a part of that kind of mix, collegially, and for the opportunities that presents. I have been serving in a rural context for these 30 years. I did my clinical work in New York City, and I did my other degrees in New York City, and I love the city. But I love the diversity of our annual conference. I love having dialogue across some theological difference, but finding our common ground. It's been a great place to be. I do have a lot of less than full-time compensation places, and I receive from time to time emails from outside of the annual conference, and I follow up. I check on references, I check other things, because I have settings that are less than full-time. Some of them are kind of challenging, and some of them are great opportunities. My first appointment, I had been ordained by the New York Annual Conference, but they didn't know if they had anything for me. So I was kind of in limbo. And then they called me up and they said, we have an opportunity. which I've now learned is it's code for some things have been slightly off, but we'd like to let you give it a try. And yeah, just I'm telling you the truth. I tell you the truth. That church that I first went to was 2 Point Charge that had been in some conflict, and they didn't want a woman, and they didn't want anybody single, and they didn't want anybody just out of seminary, and there was a list of things they didn't want, and I was exactly what they did not want. And yet, within the first meeting, we found our common language. In Methodism, because we have had an appointment system and not a call system, women have been able to serve. When women were not getting pulpits and call systems, we got appointed in the Methodist Church. But you would go to a place where at first they were like, well, we don't want a woman. Well, y'all, you ain't supposed to be in ministry. And that was always a challenge, but also an opportunity. I have to say that, that first church, we came to love each other, and it was a great opportunity. But at first things were a little rocky because they had been through a lot, and I was fresh out of seminary. But God's grace is abundant. Or as my grandma said, if the Lord calls you, the Lord will equip you. And I've been here ever since. I never expected to stay in parish work as long as I have. I thought I would be doing what Reverend Stevens is doing. That was my plan. I'm going to go back and teach in seminary. But two things I discovered is that I love those church folk they the ones who introduced you to Jesus. Never forget that. When you get all your degrees and you've got your theological depth, never forget who introduced you to Jesus, and respect him. And I found that I still had so much to learn and so much to enjoy about being with folks in faith communities and the texture of life, bringing the sacred, recognizing the sacred with them in all their daily life, hanging out with the guys at the deli, drinking coffee, going to the kids' basketball games and sitting up in the stands, for me, are all a part of being a pastoral presence in a community. And I love that. In the New York Annual Conference, we have a lot of different kinds of settings. And you have a lot of different kinds of colleagues to learn from and learn with. Our cabinet table is very diverse, theologically, culturally, racially, in terms of gender. I'm married to a woman. We are all very different, but we choose love, and we learn from each other. So that's, we're pretty, I know Reverend Moss and I feel pretty good about where we live and serve. And we both came from somewhere else to New York. Sometimes there are not a whole lot of opportunities, but if the Lord calls you, we'll be listening with you. Man, when I start talking a lot, my accent comes up. So there's a few Southerners in this meeting.
I was going to say that students at Lancaster, you are seeing a panel of Southern transplants, and I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I lived in Texas for 10 years, and you all may know my wife is from Dallas. So I feel like we've got the Southern Bible Belt covered here, and we are really excited about ministry. And they are selling the New York Annual Conference, but not only that, they're just inspiring me. I hope they're inspiring you. They're inspiring me about the church, tomorrow's church today, because they're talking about change. And for a church or anything else to grow, to be vital means to be able to grow. To grow means you got to be able to change. And I'm so excited to hear that the church is ready to change, because that means it's ready to grow. And I couldn't be more pleased. And students, I want you to know, these folks are serious, because Karen Monk reached out to me. She said, I want to meet with the Lancaster students. I want to talk with these students. I want to share what's going on in the New York Annual Conference. And I want to be connected, because I'm putting words in her mouth. That this is what I inferred from what she said. She wants to meet folks who are passionate about ministry, and and she knows that we are ministry colleagues, and she wants to know who her ministry colleagues are who are going to take the church today into the church tomorrow. So
And there's a background story that I met Reverend Stevens because President Rowe and I went to college together in Texas. And he said, hey, where do you live? And I told him, and he said, send me students. And I said, send me pastors. So we began a little dialogue. It's been really exciting to be in conversation with Reverend Stevens, to bring Reverend Moss into this conversation, and to spend some time with you folks. It's a wonderful time for me. And thanks for your hospitality to Reverend Moss and myself tonight.
So let's hear from our students once more. We want to make sure everybody has a chance to share what they came with on the, something on their heart or mind you wanted to share or talk about.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for this conversation. I'm on an Episcopal track, so I'm probably not going to apply to the New York Annual Conference of the UMC at this stage in my discernment, but I really applaud what you're doing, and I really appreciate your interest in meeting with us here at LTS. I think it's really important that you bring a face to ministry. I think we're all hoping that we can be part of the change to create a new future for the church. So thanks very much for your input and insight. But I'm going to sign off right now, and I have to take another class at 8 o'clock. Thanks very much. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'd just like to say, in your recruitment process, this is Jen. I have my mask on in my shared space while I'm at my shared space. I wanted to know, in your recruitment process, do you also have a grooming process? Do you take your recruits through any kind of in-house training? Do we have to come to you with our my master's is from Asbury and Master of Arts in Christian Ministry, and I'm finishing up now the other classes on my MDiv, even though I am ABD at this time with my DMin. So are your roles of recruitment strictly as senior pastor, or are there other areas of recruitment, Dr. Monk and Dr. Moss, that you groom your candidates for?
So one of the models that was started by my predecessor, Reverend David Gilmore,
Yes.
he recruited several pastors to come in, and he placed them with pastors. So I have one, Reverend Shari Ponder from Atlanta. She is tasked with starting a new faith community, but she is serving now as my executive pastor, and she gets to go through every day with me. She has brought a lot to the table, though. She was an educator, a counselor, so she brought some requisite skills. So what we're working on now is indoctrinating her to the culture, moving from the South to the North. And then not only the culture in the North, but the culture in Salem. And so there are opportunities to partner. I am currently identifying other churches where that type of partnership can exist. And then there are opportunities wherein, as Reverend Monk mentioned earlier, just different groups of colleagues coming together, accountability groups, different prayer groups, things of that nature. So you would not be thrown into the deep end of the pool without a lifeguard standing there, reach, row, throw, go. So I was a Boy Scout too.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a position for a quote unquote senior pastor or pastor associate under the tutelage of a pastor. Are there other roles, executive roles?
Oh, okay. At the Reverend Monk, at the present, we are looking to place individuals in churches in a pastoral role. Yeah, I'll let that sit there. That's what we're looking for.
Okay. Thank you.
My question is there assistance? because I do know the cost of living in New York is quite different from Pennsylvania. And so, and obviously, you know, you're looking for a bivocational person who would work another job while also working in the ministry. So is there assistance in helping that person acclimate, you know, to meet people to possibly get that other position, you know, the other job, the other source of income, or is that left to the individual?
I'll take that for now. So this was last year was my first appointment season, bringing new pastors in. I brought in, there were 2 who came from outside the annual conference, who are working bivocationally. One I connected to chaplaincy opportunities, got her connected into networks to find chaplaincy work. The other, he is working in communications in some avenue, but we also make sure that he was plugged into some peers. He happens to be a young Korean pastor. I have 7 young Korean pastors, all 6 men and 1 young woman. They work together. They provide support to one another, working cross-culturally, but also avenues of connection, because the other pastors have been here in some time. So try to connect people to peers, cohorts, and then what I know of resources within our communities and with the 8 counties that are in my district. I try to pair people up where I know there are opportunities.
Well, since we have a silence here, so is ministry of music considered one of your ministries? You mentioned chaplaincy as a bivocational connection.
You know, here's the difference between the South and the North. In the South, there's a lot of paid ministry music positions. A lot of our places have volunteers or very minimum paid. The largest pulpits or the largest congregations generally can afford musicians. And just as musicians, folks, more people used to play instruments, period. It's harder to find folks. So we are looking at places where we want to, because pre-recorded music is not the same as having a music leader, a person who teaches, who leads, the shared singing, which by the way, we miss because we are not singing in our congregations right now. We are masked and we are not singing, but the longing for music is one of those things we're going to remember to recenter in the life of congregations. For me, I know that's something we need to really lift and support, but as a paid position, we don't have many. I could say that. And Reverend Moss, I know you can speak from your perspective as well.
Yeah, coming from the South to the North, I'm in, when I started at Salem, I invested in music, I invested in marketing, and I invested in, what was the third? Music, marketing, and technology, getting an IT person, because I wanted to drive us to where I had come from. My music ministry budget right now is about $6,000 a month, and that's up from 0. So they weren't very happy with me, but I know what it takes to get a church going, because oftentimes individuals, they will connect with that music before they connect with anything that is.
Absolutely.
And so that's what's serving us well now. I am getting ready to double that budget because of where we are and where we're going to be. We're not anticipating opening until 2022. We're going to stay closed for the rest of this year. And then again, that's dependent upon what the bishop says. I do know that Salem will remain closed. So we've got to ramp up those key areas there. But that's just for Salem. As Reverend Monk said, a lot of churches, they do not have that. And see, my budget is supplemented by individuals from Atlanta. And they're sending checks, $5,000 a month, whatever I need. They're sending, because we've not tapped into that resource being an urban or inner city church. The members do a great job, though, a great job of catching up, of doing what they can. but it's a different life, but it is so rewarding. Let me bring you back up out the pit. This is my close. Hold on now. It is so rewarding. Hallelujah.
Yes. Thank you. So you all will keep our names, or do we send you a portfolio? What is your process?
So what we can do, and we can coordinate getting your portfolio, your resume, just a vitae, whatever you have that will give us an idea of some of what you shared this evening, your job, your preference, things of that nature. And if we need more information, then we will reach back out to you. But
Thank you.
The key piece is those who are interested, making sure that we're able to discern, we can key in on gifts and graces, and that there is a hunger and an excitement. I share with Reverend Stevens and Reverend Monks, this is the best time to be in ministry. There are people,
Yes.
a doom and gloom message, but let me tell you something. This is the best time to be in ministry, because
Hallelujah.
we're coming out. We're definitely coming out of this thing. And two, because we're having to sit still, it's positioning us to be more in tune and in touch with our gifts and with God.
Yes.
And moving from doing church to being the church and making it happen. Let me quit. I'm about to
You're about to preach.
You are, yeah, I hear you. Let me remind folks, Marvin Moss and Karen Monk can be found very easily with a Google search in New York Annual Conference. Go on the New York Annual Conference website and put in their names. Very easy to find. You can get their contact information directly there and be in direct contact. As folks, these are your colleagues in ministry, whether you're in the Baltimore Washington Conference or North Georgia or the UCC or the Episcopal Church. These are your colleagues in ministry. Stay in touch with them. They are valuable colleagues, no matter jobs aside. They're valuable folks to know, and they want to know you. So I'm encouraging you to be in touch.
Thank you.
So other folks, who you have questions for, we just have a few minutes left, so now's the time. Well, Karen and Marvin, would you like to give us just a few words of sending forth then before we close? I'm going to make one announcement, and I'm going to turn it over to you to send us forth. In the chat, I'm putting an announcement about an upcoming event during Spirit Week at LTS, February 17th. This is Ash Wednesday at 4 p.m. Another bivocational ministry Zoom event, integrating call and livelihood through bivocational ministry. So I encourage you to look for details as that event comes closer. So Marvin and Karen, would you send us forth?
Madam DS.
Well, thank you, friends. I mean, thank you for coming out tonight, joining us. Thank you for saying yes to God's call in your life. And like I said, my grandma Ann was she was a missionary Baptist, and she didn't know any women in ministry. And I knew the Lord was calling me, but I kind of didn't want to say yes. And Grandma said, well, so what do you think about, darling? What do you think you're going to do with your life? And I said, well, Lord might be calling me to ministry. And I thought, no, this is it. This is my out. Because Grandma's going to say, well, honey, Lord might be calling you to something else. You should call him back. But she did not. She said, well, the Lord called you, the Lord will equip you. She was not my out. She was my word from God. These are interesting, exciting times to be in ministry. And God has called you just for this time and gifted you and graced you and equipped you. And whatever comes of tonight's conversation is just part of the story. As Reverend Stevens says, it's not about jobs, it's about the journey. It's about the vocation, and then about finding places to live out and into that vocation, bringing Christ to the world in some new and exciting ways in really challenging but grace-filled times. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you. We are here for, Reverend Moss and I will respond to your emails. We're happy to provide any support and guidance that we can give. But thank you for allowing us to be with you, and the Lord bless you on your journey. Reverend Moss?
I shared those sentiments. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am excited. And I shared my move with you earlier to let you know that along my journey, as I've listened to God, I've missed the mark here and there, but this is a definite bullseye. I said that this was my third appointment. The first one was in the suburbs in Alpharetta, Reverend Stevens. I built that church, grew it from less than 100 to over 1,200, moved to Cascade, 3,000, and then I came to Harlem. And there are colleagues and friends calling me crazy to this day, but they have no idea what it feels like to know that A, you're where God has planted you, and B, seeing what God is doing each and every day. I mean, just the growth spiritually, the growth in terms of commitment to service, and then the growth in terms of reaching out and evangelizing. So as you pray, as you discern, even as you consider, the move with your families, God will speak, and God will give you a peace that surpasses all understanding. Hallelujah. And we welcome you if God is leading you here.
Amen. And thank you both. Appreciate it. Folks, it's been great to spend the evening with you. We've got to sign off. It is 1/4 after the hour. So take care. God bless.